Welcome to the Happiness Habits podcast. My name is Adil,
And I'm Libby.
and we've started Adbra Happiness Habits to help with our own mental health.
In each episode, we'll be speaking to an inspiring guest about a particular way we can grow our resilience to life's ups and downs. Each episode is full of simple and actionable tips, and we hope you'll find them helpful. Happy listening!
Today I'm speaking with the amazing Lucy Jones about the role that nature can play in our mental health. Lucy is a writer and journalist. She previously worked at NME and the Daily Telegraph, and her writing on culture, science, and nature has been published all over the place, including BBC Earth, BBC Wildlife, The Sunday Times, The Guardian, The New Statesman, just to name a few. Her first book, Foxes Unearthed, was celebrated for its brave, bold, and honest, I'm quoting, account for our relationship with the fox. So that was an award-winning book, and now she has released a new book called Losing Eden, subtitle Why Our Minds Need the Wild. And this book is a beautiful journey into the relationship between us and nature, and it's a really thought-provoking read. And it's also the topic of today's episode, which is what role does nature have in our mental health, and what can we do to incorporate more nature into our happiness habits? So without further ado, here is my conversation with Lucy Jones. I hope you enjoy it. Lucy, thank you so much for being with us today.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So you've written Foxes Unearthed and now Losing Eden. And nature seems to definitely be a common thread, at least for these two books. So could you tell us a little bit about, I guess, yourself, perhaps a little bit about where your fascination with nature came from, and just for us to kind of get a feel for your story as well a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a freelance journalist and author. I live in Hampshire in England. Foxes Unearthed was my first book, which was published about 5 years ago. And that was about the relationship between the British people and the fox. So I was interested in the fox as a kind of flint for emotions, and the kind of last big wild animal in the UK that could kind of incite really strong emotions from people of love and hate. My second book, Losing Eden, which was published earlier this year, has been quite a long journey. The research journey was about 8 years or so. And it started in London when I was experiencing a period of depression and anxiety and addiction issues. And I was living quite a kind of urban, industrialized lifestyle. I didn't really have much connection with the outdoors or the natural world. But I found when I was trying to recover and get sober that I was drawn to nature, specifically Walthamstow marshes, and I found walking daily and engaging with the natural world just incredibly therapeutic, kind of as therapeutic as the medicine and psychotherapy and support I was getting from other people. And that led me to wonder exactly how and why nature seems to be therapeutic and make people kind of feel calm or happy or peaceful. I mean, I guess a lot of people would assume or intuit that being outside, being by a beach or in a forest in some way makes us feel good. But what I wanted to do with Losing Eden was to look at the science and the research and evidence, and kind of drill down into the nuts and bolts of the relationship. So looking at what happens to our brains when we're in the woods, what happens to our nervous system when we're by a lake, what happens to our kind of unconscious if we are disconnected from nature, and so on. So that was the kind of beginning of the research journey, and that led to Losing Eden. Yeah.
And so just a quick question, I guess, just as a follow-up. When you're saying that, you've started to spend a bit more time in nature, etc., was that, I guess, did someone recommend that to you at the time, or was it just kind of almost like a random thing that it just happened and you noticed that it had an impact and then you started doing it more?
Yeah, that's a good question. So no, it wasn't recommended to me. It wasn't prescribed to me. Even though, that's something that's happening more now, is that doctors are prescribing nature, which is interesting. But no, it was more, it was kind of a side effect of going running. So I knew that running might help lift my mood and give me some endorphins. And kind of lift me up a bit. But so I'd set out for runs, and then I'd end up just slowing down and walking and looking and wanting to kind of look at the trees and just spend time with the birds and the insects and noticing flowers and water and the weather. And it more became that I was hooked on looking and spending time with all these different species, and the effect that had on me afterwards was just a kind of sense of peace and calm. In those early months of sobriety, I felt I had a lot of kind of quite intense emotions, lots of stuff to work through, and I found going into nature seemed to give me a sense of balance and just a kind of soothing, really. It felt I would always feel soothed afterwards and refreshed. And yeah, I hadn't been, it's kind of crazy for it to be so surprising to me, but I think that speaks to the fact that I, like so many of us, lived in such a disconnected way from the natural world, that I was rarely outside. I was more watching David Attenborough documentaries than actually kind of spending time in nature. I had no relationship to nature, so it did take me by surprise that the effect was so therapeutic, and that's what I really wanted to explore and examine, because I thought, if spending time in nature can be so helpful for me at my kind of lowest moment, then why didn't I know more about it? Or why aren't we doing more to protect nature? If it and as soon as I experienced it, I read and heard many other accounts, if it can be so helpful for so many people.
Thank you for speaking so openly about your story, Lucy, and it kind of helps. I think a lot of people will also perhaps hear some parallels with the way they kind of look at nature, and I think it's really interesting that you're saying that we've all heard that it's really good to be in nature and all that, and we kind of all almost perhaps inherently know it, but we're not really. It's not actually a topic that we talk about very much on a daily basis. It's just one of these things that we're kind of assumed to be true, but it's not necessarily something that we're actively trying to work on, or perhaps to sort of add some time in nature. I guess one of the things I've been thinking about, so I could I'll ask you about your book a little bit more detail because there's a few things that you said which I just want to follow up. I'm really curious about. But just in terms of the research that you've done for this book, do you feel that it's fair to say that as a population, I guess, let's say in the UK here, that people underestimate the role that nature has on their well-being? You know, I guess we all have these different levers that we can actuate to improve our well-being and our happiness or our mental health, like, you know, sleep. You mentioned exercise, etc. Do you feel that it's almost like one of these levers that we've forgotten a little bit?
I do, yeah. I think that we, you know, our disconnection from the natural world, and also our negative impact on it, has never been at this level before. And I think one of the things that we are overlooking as a society and the population is how crucial contact with nature is for mental health, which, you know, the cutting edge science is now starting to prove robustly. You know, from the earliest years, kind of in the education system, children don't get adequate opportunities to love and to nurture and to know the living world. And that kind of continues, I think, through the life course. If you look at how we design our urban areas, and, you know, how we destroy ancient woodlands, and, you know, the decline of species, like the trends suggest that, you know, while we might like nature, it's very much on our terms, and, you know, it's something that we fit into the margins, both physically and tangibly in our living areas, but also in our lives. You know, the research that I looked at and wrote about in Losing Eden just blew my mind. I stumbled onto this kind of huge scientific field, and as I started to read more and learn more, you know, the kind of the diversity and the quality and the quantity of evidence is just unequivocal. Nature is really good for our mental health, and now, you know, now I've seen that. For me, it becomes as important as sleep and exercise and a good diet, and, you know, social connections and so on. But I don't think that that's something, you know, that as a society we realize or acknowledge. We've kind of forgotten that, you know, we are nature, we come from nature, we are animals, and that we need to be connected with our kind of our living world, our environment, in order to be happy. But obviously, you know, mental health is very complicated and complex. There are many different factors. This year, for example, has really shown us inequality of access to nature. You know, so there's a real diversity of experience. You know, people who live in more affluent areas have more access to higher quality green space, and therefore the health benefits that go with that. Those in disadvantaged areas have less. So I think that really speaks to this position that our society is in, that we don't realize how important, you know, the restoration benefits that nature can give us are, at a population and individual level. Yeah.
That's really interesting, and it's one of the things I've been thinking about quite a lot as well, which is, you know, the situation that we're finding ourselves in, specifically this year with the pandemic. You know, it has had an impact on everyone, but at the same time, it's, as you said, it hasn't had an equal impact on everyone. Some people have been impacted much more, and some people have managed to just kind of live their lives, perhaps with some inconveniences, but overall kind of managed to just live kind of normally. And one of the things I've noticed, and linking it to nature, is that, you know, I have been really privileged to be able to work from home for a long period during this year. And from a nature perspective, I actually feel I have been closer to it because, you know, I was able to go out for a run at lunchtime sometimes, and you know, really lucky because we live next to the canal here in London, being able to see, you know, swans, cygnets, things like this, and so I almost feel that, I don't know, I feel almost a little bit guilty that, you know, it feels like COVID almost sort of brought me a little bit closer to nature. But at the same time, I appreciate the vast majority of people, a huge amount of people, perhaps don't have that luxury. And I guess this kind of leads me to my question. Do you feel that the pandemic that we've been going through, has it all been bad from a sort of relationship with nature, or, you know, as on the example I've talked about for myself, do you see any other, perhaps, I don't know, silver lining almost sounds too positive, but any things that encouraged us to think a little bit more about nature?
Yeah, I think that your experience has, I mean, has been a kind of common experience by many. And there does seem to have been this year a kind of renaissance of love for the natural world, and we've seen that from, you know, people buying seeds online and planting their own vegetables and growing their own food, to you know, the fact that it's much safer for people to meet outdoors, and so people have been gathering at, you know, at different sites, natural beauty sites, and the data backs that up too. So the People in Nature survey found that people who were spending more time in nature this year said that it made them feel happy. So we know that there has been a kind of shift perhaps in people's relationship with the natural world. I mean, through that, obviously, other kind of structural issues have been shown up as well. For example, you know, for populations who live in flats without gardens, or who live like not an easy walk from a green space, their ability and opportunity to access the well-being benefits of nature just hasn't been there. So it's kind of shone a light on that inequality. And also, you know, we all saw pictures of kind of thousands of people descending on Snowdon in Wales or certain beaches, and it's become clear that in this country there are kind of honeypot nature sites that people are going to because they want to, you know, experience the wild and be outside. And I think that has shown how little access we actually have in this country to the countryside. So we are not allowed to access 92% of the land in England and 98% of the rivers and waterways because of the law of trespass. And there's a new campaign at the moment, a Right to Roam campaign, trying to look at that, which is I think really important. But there's clearly, you know, I mean, I wouldn't call it a silver lining, but the pandemic has showed up a lot of these structural problems, which need to be fixed, you know, by our politics, especially as this evidence is growing about the importance of nature for well-being. And I think it's quite important to say that, you know, not everyone is a nature lover. You know, lots of people, you know, loads of my friends get their restoration and their relaxation from other things, you know. It could be anything, music, TV, you know, going to the pub, whatever. There's many different like restorative activities on there that kind of affect our well-being. But what I found so fascinating with the research is that background nature, so even, you know, living in an area with trees on your street, or walking through a park instead of a busy road on your way to the shop, that can have measurable potential therapeutic benefits. You know, even if you're not someone who, like me, wants to take photographs of moss and insects and so on, just having that background nature in your living area is very important. And I think that has really crucial implications for kind of the urban design and the way we live in our society.
And so, how would you, without necessarily going through the the detail, because if people want to know the detail, they should they should read the book. But how would you sort of explain the way we can try to, you talked about doing a lot of research and how do we actually measure some of these things from a scientific perspective? We measure people's, the impact on people's well-being or mental health, etc. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, there are now kind of many hundreds, thousands really, of studies from researchers across the world trying to measure this impact. And they vary from kind of neuroscientists to endocrinologists, from environmental psychologists to kind of environmental health researchers. One example that I really like is the smell of the earth after it's rained. So do you know this word petrichor? Petrichor means, when it's rained and the earth just smells delicious and kind of metallic, and like you get it really strongly in like the woods, and lovely smell. And some scientists measured the impact of smelling that compound, which is actually called geosmin, on brain activity. And they found that the area of the brain associated with calmness and relaxation was triggered when participants smelt the compound in petrichor. So that's an example. And then there's a wonderful area called the science of awe. So where researchers have found that if someone experiences the emotion of awe, which is often found in nature, they have lower levels of an inflammation biomarker, which is called a cytokine. And that's what we want. We want lower levels of inflammation, especially in the modern world we live in, when we have a lot of high levels of inflammation. So there's lots of different kind of methods scientists can use to drill down into this relationship. And I think another one that I really like is I read earlier in the research journey, I read this kind of Facebook post about a bacteria in soil called M. vaccae, which apparently has kind of antidepressant-like effects. And I thought that just sounds crazy and kind of woo and unscientific. But in fact, on a closer look, studies show that this bacteria that's found in soil does have antidepressant-like effects. So that could be why, if you're a gardener and you love gardening, you have a buzz afterwards. You feel kind of great after planting. So yeah, those are just a few examples of some studies and some science that I thought were quite amazing.
Absolutely amazing. Yes, thank you for all these examples. So for anyone who will be listening to us, what would be perhaps the top sort of 3 things that you think we can do to sort of improve our relationship with nature? I'm not even sure if that's the right way of framing it, but perhaps getting a little bit more out of it and just putting nature a little bit more in the center of our daily life. Any sort of simple tips or just habit changes that you can think of?
Sure, I'd say that a simple thing you could do is, if you can, find a route on your way to like the shop or somewhere that you might go regularly, work, or to visit someone, that goes through a green space, a park, or by the canal, or through an urban woodland or so on. So even if it takes a little bit longer, if you go through a green space, you'll be potentially experiencing those therapeutic benefits. Also, I think, we all live in kind of different circumstances, but thinking about a way you can make your living area nature friendly. So that might mean, if you live in a flat with a balcony, you could put up a bird feeder, or you could put up a bird box, or something like that to be more wildlife friendly. If you have a garden, you could leave it a bit wilder in order to kind of encourage other species. Think about the practices that you use in your garden to make them more nature friendly, because I think that nature can give us so much, but there's also a lot to be said for a reciprocal relationship, and thinking about how we can be good co-tenants with other species, and how we can share the planet a bit more equally with nature. And then I think the other one, what I would say is, and it's easier said than done, we all live busy lives, but kind of slowing down and noticing and paying attention. And I live in a very urban area on a really busy road, and even in the cracks of the pavements there are kind of beautiful fractal shaped weeds and wildflowers. So just taking the time to kind of slow down and look for colour, look for shape, look for insects, listen to the birds, giving yourself permission to do that. I think that before I embarked on losing Eden, I kind of thought it was a bit of an indulgence, a bit self-indulgent to kind of spend the time connecting with nature, but actually it's like I said before, as important as eating fruit and vegetables or exercising. And slowing down and really following your curiosity might lead to wonder and awe.
And I think it's great that pretty much all of these suggestions aren't really either expensive, or they don't actually take a huge amount of time. And yes, fine, if I have to go the slightly longer way home to go through a park or something like this, fine, maybe I'll lose, in inverted commas, a couple of minutes. But I think, as you said, it's not necessarily time lost. It's time where we're potentially recharging our batteries, which means we can do more, perhaps, or basically be calmer and happier in the rest of our time. And I think the other thing, which I just want to I guess reflect back to you, which you said, which was really interesting, is I framed my question in a way: what can we do to get more out of nature? But I think you kind of underlined a really important point, which is it's not just about us; it's also about us, doing whatever we can to make sure we also protect nature, so that not only it can sort of thrive, but also it can be part of our daily lives, not just next month, next year, but in 20, 100 years time.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think one of the things that I found very empowering this year has been being more involved in like community environmental work. So looking up tree planting days, or trying to kind of rewild little areas where I live. I think kind of joining with other people to, just to do simple things like tree planting or so on, or campaigning for wilder verges or roundabouts. It can really make a difference. And then you do have that kind of more reciprocal kind of kinship with nature, which is, well, I find it very rewarding.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily just one or the other. You can you can both do something positive for nature, get something out of it, and potentially, as you're saying, if you're doing it in sort of with groups of friends or something like this, it can also sort of tick that box as well and allow you to recharge your batteries in all these different ways.
Right.
Lucy, thank you so much for all this amazing information. I'm conscious that I don't want to take too much of your time, but could you just tell us a little bit about where people can find the book? And so I understand we can get it in Kindle format. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that side of things?
Sure, you can get Losing Eden, I think, in most bookshops. Yeah, it's available in Kindle. It's always great to go and buy direct from your local bookshop if you can. But yeah, it's around all the kind of usual places. Yes, available now.
Amazing. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for I guess all this really interesting information. And I'm a bit of a geek, so I love that you're approaching it from a really scientific perspective, and yeah, that was absolutely amazing. So it's been an absolute privilege, Lucy. Thank you so much for chatting to me today.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Happiness Habits podcast by Adbra. If you'd like to learn more about the topics we discussed today, simply go to adbra.co.uk and check our resources section for a lot of additional well-being tips and free tools. While you're at it, don't forget to check our gratitude planners, mindfulness jars and cards. They're all available on adbra.co.uk. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave us a review, or even better, tell a friend that you think would benefit from it about it. See you next time on the Happiness Habits podcast.